I absolutely love seeing trends develop in the quilting place, but I'm not sure what's hotter right now, the use of this awesome Chenille-It fiber or Elizabeth Hartman and her super cool animal patterns. So I thought, hey, let's combine the two of them to make Lisa the fancy unicorn. Hey, let's get started. If you know my dear friend Elizabeth, you know how meticulous she is, and that is actually one of the major reasons I chose her pattern to work from today, because today's video is actually all about the use of the Chenille-It fiber and how we can do it and add it to all kinds of wonderful stuff. So I'm gonna walk you through a lot of steps on the Chenille-It. But Elizabeth's patterns are awesome, and so I'm gonna let you trust her. She'll walk you all the way through the construction of the background of Lisa. Now, Lisa's made with strips, and we're gonna add the Chenille-It just to her mane. Now, this one I was playing with a little stronger color. I think I might wanna name him Glenn, but we'll talk about that later. At any rate, we're gonna be adding the Chenille-It onto these strips. So when I'm thinking about the colors I wanna use, and yes, how could you not resist this amazing Robert Kaufman bundle of solids, right? So I've actually been using it for a couple of the tutorials recently. I just love this stuff. But I chose some of the colors in here to match the colors of my chenille. So what I want to do is I want to make sure I have base layers of Kona to match the layers of chenille I'm using, right? So that way, when we layer up and stack the chenille and then cut through, that color also is exposed. Now, one of the cool things about Elizabeth's patterns is the construction method is really based on the concept of strips and either squares or rectangles that are just sewn in diagonal lines, like a snowball, if you will, or a mitered corner. So that being said, right here where the mane on the unicorn is forming, this piece right here was actually my scrap. So I had put on a white square onto the strips I had made of the background of the mane, and so this is the remaining part. And so what I really wanted to think about is how many layers of chenille do I want to use, because that will, I guess, determine the amount of fuzz or the curl or the loft. The more layers, the more fuzzy it gets. I was also concerned about what would happen in this bulk management, and at the end of the day, I decided I was going to actually use the application of the chenille as part of the quilting technique, and this is how I did it. I went ahead and decided to start by taking strips of the chenille, and here's the sample that was kind of my layer, and I get so excited. I want to slow down a little bit, and you'll notice that I have not been teasing this too much because I really don't want to tease it up and make it all curly and frilly until most of the sewing and quilting is done, because as you can see, there are going to be fibers that come up with this, but the Chenille-It fabric itself, or the Chenille-It fiber, is a very loose grain. Some of us would call it a homespun style fabric, but it's already cut on the bias. So yes, it will curl up, but it's not gonna make a big old mess, but I still didn't want to get those little threads caught in my free motion machine quilting, because again, I'm doing the application of this as part of the quilting process. So in order to put the chenilling down, I chose 3 layers. So with 3 layers, I want to be able to go ahead and I'm going to put 2 strips wide, but 3 layers tall in each and every strip. So to measure, I want to go past my diagonal up here, and I'm going to be pretty darn accurate today. I'm going to just kind of lay that down, and I'm just stacking them right up on top of each other. And I have my other colors already cut, but I'm going to show you how I do all of the pink, and you're going to see how nicely, this is surface, so it's not going to get caught in these seam allowances here. Oop, got myself a little carried away. We need 3 strips. Oh, this is a great point. Now, they've already joined the Chenille-It fiber on the bias as well. I'm just doing these small strips, so I don't need to really worry about that much. So I'm gonna be a little wasteful today. I'm gonna 86 that little bias piece in there, and I'm gonna make that nice strip because I forgot. I was telling you I needed 3 layers, and now I'm gonna have to go back and count because I got a little distracted. None of us ever get distracted in our quilting rooms though, right? I'm actually very distracted because I'm sitting here thinking to myself, I wonder if I had that old picture from Quilt Market where Elizabeth Hartman was trimming my mane. I had some bangs that were getting out of control, and I asked if anybody would be willing to help me give a little haircut, and apparently Elizabeth likes to cut hair, which would make this all the more appropriate of a tutorial today. Now, 3 layers thick. We're gonna start on this outside edge, the first edge here, but remember, this piece looks like patchwork, but I was doing it on the quilt here as the finished quilting. So that being said, and I did finish my actual pillow. This is actually made as the pillow. There's information on that in there. So I needed to make sure that I had the seam available. So I actually put 1, 2, 3, only 3 strips of the pink because I wanted to protect that last seam allowance right there. So right now I'm just going to show you how to sew all these on. But at this end, we're going to pretend like that's the end of it, and we're not going to put that last piece there. I'm going to use a white thread on my machine today because I want it to just match basically the eye. I don't want this to show up at all. You most certainly could take the time to match your threads to each fabric color. And this is not going to, well, yes, it is. It is going to show on the back of the quilt. So your bobbin thread is the color that matches the back of your bobbin on your quilt. Now I am starting up at the top on that diagonal, and I want my stitching to stop right on that diagonal so later I can scissor cut it. We're not going to sew long on these, okay? We're going to sew long at the bottom, but not at the top. So I'm going to lock in this stitching, and I'm just running my foot right down the middle of my Chenille-It strips. All 3 of them are fairly nicely stacked on top of each other. Okay, and even though I love my edge guide, we're not going to need it right now. So I'm just going to swing it out of the way. And then very easily, I'm just going to grab my next length of strips. I'm going to bring them in. They go a little bit long past that 45-degree angle that's up there. And you can see they're just kind of setting next to each other, just like yay. And then I'm going to start that right up at the little seam there. Next stack. I don't know why I'm being so accurate. It doesn't need to be. Okay, now I'm going to bounce on to the next color of the orange here, and I have my stacks. My strips are all cut down here, ready to go, so I can just start sewing through here. And I'm actually going to hit caffeinated mode probably in a second, but I do want to point out, if you've ever made your own chenille where you've actually had to go through and then cut through all but the last layer and do all this strip management yourself, this is such a wonderful product. It makes it so easy and fun to play with. And I think that's why it's becoming so trendy. But anyways, let's hit that gas pedal, finish this out, so you got a real feel of the way this is going to look when it's done here for you. Now, what I did find after I did lots and lots of strips is it's starting to get a little bit tight towards the end. So remember, we're just going to put in 3 strips, and let's say we're in an area where it just feels like it's getting a little crowded. This is going to curl up again, remember? So if you really want, you can slide this green over a little bit further, make yourself a little bit of room, a little bit of space, and then we're just going to go ahead and get that sewing line right down there. Now, I did just spin my project sample, but remember, if I was doing this as a quilt, as I did as my quilt stitching, I started at the top because it was the center of my block, like a good quilter would, and I moved towards the border area. So we start in the middle of our quilts, we move out towards the border. But right now, I just want to show you next how we're going to get this last piece on and then trim it all back. Not much stitching needed on that last little piece. Okay, and again, I was trying to leave myself a little bit of space for that 1/4 inch. Now, as I flip this over, I'm going to grab a ruler and my big rotary cutter, and I'm trimming here to the block, which would have been the edge of my quilt. So I can do this with a rotary cutter because it's still out in the space because the quilt was not bound or it was not turned into the pillow yet. But for this top edge, I can't do a rotary cutter and I can't fold it back. There's too much bulk. So we're going to need to use ourselves a fairly good and thick pair of scissors. And what I found is I just tried to do one at a time, and I'm going to kind of put my scissor blade, if I can, as close to that 45 as possible, and then I'm just going to snip it. Put that scissor blade up there on the 45. And if you start to cut into the other rows, no problem. That's what we want. We want to maintain that line. here, and then will come the magic. But before the real magic happened, I did go back to the quilt. So why don't you start looking behind me at the wonderful detail, I think, in the machine quilting above the mane on Lisa here, right? So what I did with some fun machine stitching is I added some more frill. Remember, she's the fancy unicorn, but I also did just some regular straight stitching just to anchor everything down to the areas so that now we are ready to really start teasing our chenille. Let me show you here how it starts. I'm going to use some moisture, a little spray bottle at first, and then you can use your fingers to start to rub it back and forth. And I find that several applications of the mist and the water will become important. So for example, right now, it's just starting, the first layer starting to kind of taco up. But watch, let's come back to the quilt. Now, if I'm over here, this has been sprayed a few times, and it's been in my suitcase so it could come out here, because even though it's a unicorn, it wasn't a Pegasus, so I couldn't fly on it. So let's just keep teasing this up a little bit. And so what I found was it kind of tacos at first, and then it will start to curl and do all kinds of weird stuff for us, which is what we want. We want it to be fancy, right? And then not only that, but of course this is going to be radical if we were to want to put it in our washer or our dryer. Now, quilt finishing versus pillow finishing, that's all on you. There's a lot of different ways to get it all washed up in technique, and you absolutely do not have to put it in the wash. You could probably just put it in the dryer to make it fluffy and fuzzy, but either way, this Chenille-It stuff is so fun to work with, super easy, comes in a huge variety of colors. I'm sure you're gonna have a blast with it. So, what I'd like to know from you is what's the first chenille project you're gonna do? Drop it in our comments below, and we'll catch you next time right here at Man Sewing. Thanks for being a Man Sewing fan. It's great to have you out there encouraging me to create fantastic new content. If you've missed any of the videos, we've got links for you here and here. And while you're checking those out, make sure you're subscribed. We don't want you to miss any of the action.